It seems like everyone is miserable about Bitcoin right now, and that might be the single most bullish signal on the board. In this episode of Bitcoin for Millennials, I talk with Michael Sullivan, an engineer who quantifies the emotional state of the market by running thousands of posts through machine learning, tracking how the mood shifts over time. And what he showed me is that the anger, the infighting, the disapproval, it's all hitting levels never recorded before. And stick around to learn why historically, when the room gets this quiet and this angry, it's been the best time to acquire Bitcoin in years. If you're enjoying my content, it would mean a lot to me if you could subscribe to the channel and like my video to support my journey. Thanks a lot. Now let's dive in to this episode. All right, Michael Sullivan, welcome back to Bitcoin for Millennials.
What's up, man? Great to be here. Excited to get into it.
Yeah, I'm happy you're here too. The vibes are absolutely terrible, and I think it's interesting how you talk about how that's actually a bullish thing. And so I'm very interested to hear your thoughts on that, and also kind of like your new focus, actually looking at sentiment, right? Looking at how people talk, at intensity, and all that stuff. Yeah, like I said, you said the vibes are as bad as they've ever been almost, right?
Mhm.
But that is also very bullish. Can you make the case? Why are bad vibes bullish?
Also, for those people haven't seen my work before, Michael Sullivan, I'm been obsessed with language and engineering for a long time. And I always felt like there was more embedded in words than people normally realize, especially in the Bitcoin community. Lots of like hyper logical folks who are deep in the weeds of like technical stuff, I think are often blind to some of the emotions that are kind of hiding beneath the surface. I've been really interested in trying to like quantify that and find different ways to visualize where things are at. So yeah, like you said, vibes are super bad right now, but that's a really high level thing. Like we can get really, really granular on specific different emotions that are out there in the system. And that's been really fascinating to me. But as I've dived into some of the sentiment data, a trend has kind of appeared, which might not be the most novel takeaway, but people are disproportionately excited and optimistic around tops, and they're disproportionately angry, disapproving of one another, and fearful around bottoms. And some of these emotional things right now are just like at all-time lows, and a lot of these negative emotions. And it's like just looking historically, that's so bullish typically. That's like exactly the kind of pattern and emotional mood that you would see around market bottoms. So ironically, the more I've delved into this work, the more optimistic I've became, because you're kind of seeing all these like things that are like, oh yeah, people are not in great spirits right now. And it kind of makes me bullish.
Yeah, I find it interesting that people talk about the 4-year cycle, etc. Right, and I think I am personally really fading that or ignoring that, maybe to my own detriment or whatever the opportunity cost of maybe trading for more Bitcoin or whatnot. Because I just think like I think I just tuned that all out. I just think like you said, and what I said also to you before we started recording. I think Bitcoin is just extremely rational. By the way, I don't think all people are obviously extremely rational. I think some are rational way earlier than other people,
Mhm.
right? But the 4-year cycle for me, there's all these different opinions about, and also data around, no, it's the business cycle, right? It's what's it called, like um, the spending in business and all that stuff. And then the 4-year cycle, when people talk about the 4-year cycle, I just think like, yeah, that's just a psychological thing, right? Like there's people that actually sold the top because they followed the 4-year cycle. So kudos to them, right? Um, but I feel like I don't want to play that psychological game because I just think I know what Bitcoin is and I should just keep on holding it, right? Like I don't want to try to time the top and et cetera. So for me, like the 4-year cycle is an extremely psychological thing, and I find it interesting that you kind of um, go there too, right? Like have you found anything? Like what do you think of that? Do you have the same thoughts, and are you finding something interesting, or did you follow the 4-year cycle as a psychological thing before? Because for me, there's just a big discrepancy. Like it is the 4-year cycle because people say it is the 4-year cycle, and then they're going to act like there's a 4-year cycle, right? And then the 4-year cycle repeats just based on psychology, while fundamentally, I'd say the thesis for Bitcoin has never been stronger. So if you're just rational, you just hodl and ignore the psychological talk, basically.
You basically hit on one of the things that made this way more interesting than I was even originally anticipating it being, because I just first started like wanting to kind of explore this data and just see where it led me. I really like pursuing ideas and seeing where they go. But Bitcoin is such an interesting realm to analyze sentiment because it's this unflinching technology that's just this like pure truthy thing that's unchanging over time. And it's just like spitting out blocks roughly every 10 minutes. And it's just so hyperlogical, like you've said, but the humans around it are not. Like, despite this technology being a constant, like the moods around it and how people relate to it in the world goes up and down with wild swings over time. And I was really like, especially coming to Bitcoin, you think about it and you conceptualize it through a really logical lens. But humans are storytelling creatures. Like we really use stories as a tool to make sense of the world. Um, so these things like narratives, like you're describing, like the 4-year cycle, we basically latch on to stories to better understand what's happening out in the world. And it doesn't always necessarily, we don't necessarily do that based on what's more true. We do it a lot of the times because of like moods and emotions that are underneath the surface. So something that happens, like I alluded to earlier with the optimism and euphoria during tops, you're more likely to be swayed by emotions and latch onto stories that are much more exciting then. Whereas right now, when moods are bad, people are fearful, people are way more likely to latch onto things like Saylor sold 32 Bitcoin and then think that it's all over and like latch onto these really stupid stories during these sorts of times. And I think there's way more psychological stuff here than I originally anticipated. Like really getting into the nuances of what's different between moods, how moods trend over time, how moods differ between people. And Bitcoin is just this insanely lucrative testing ground around these ideas that I wasn't anticipating right away. And it's been really fun from that lens.
Yeah, I think, if I would steelman in general, how you and I are talking about this now, I think every skeptic would say, now they're saying bad vibes are bullish. That's just an incredible cope of any bag holder telling themselves on the way down. Right? How do you know the difference between real capitulation and just cope? Like, what are you seeing? Like, how are people talking? And maybe also like, how do you connect it back to, let's say, previous cycles?
So I can look at people historically. So we haven't got into this yet, but one of the things I've really got into as part of this work is cohorting different groups of Bitcoiners, different communities within the Bitcoin space. Done work across a bunch of different ways to do this, but one of the more interesting ones is looking at the OG Bitcoiners, so people that have been around much longer versus like the plebs, the retail, the newer Bitcoiners, that kind of thing. So for some of the historical stuff, it's been really useful to look at the OGs, go back, look how they responded and how their moods changed, and the language they used during previous bear markets, and see how that compares to now. And this is one of the things that really stuck out recently, just showing because people kind of intuitively know that moods are bad right now, right? But I wanted to kind of quantify this. So I specifically looked at those OGs and the exact same people. So I'm looking at the same people over time in 2022 versus now. And what really stuck out to me is that in 2022, these people had the same levels of engagement, likes, comments on all their posts that they did in the 2021 bull market. So around both these periods, really high engagement. And their language was very optimistic, even though prices were down after the FTX collapse and stuff. Right now is so different than that. Their engagement's really low. There's less likes and comments in all their replies. And these exact same people, their moods are much worse generally too. There's much more of like an apathetic kind of vibe out there. There's just less engagement broadly. And to your steel man, like there's for sure some element of this. It's like kind of pattern matching looking back. But there is like this, it's kind of a study of human action in a way, looking at language. Like in the same way that like on chain analysis is a study of like the blockchain, seeing the financial, economic voting and movements that happened out there. You can kind of do that in a way with language data too, where you look at the words that people have chosen over time, how their language evolves over time, and it kind of tells you an underlying story that's sometimes beneath the surface. Like, I'm not looking at people saying like, "Oh, I think the price is going to run up to 100K tomorrow." It's sometimes like small, subtle shifts in language that you can actually quantify and look at. And doing this in crowds and doing it in different cohorts is just really interesting.
Most people stop too early with Bitcoin. They buy it, maybe move it to a wallet, and think they are done. But they're not. The real questions are how you're securing it, how private your setup is, and whether you're verifying your own transactions or trusting someone else. And what happens to your Bitcoin when something happens to you. This is the layer that most people ignore, and it's the most important one. That's why I've been working with the Bitcoin Way. They help you set up self-custody properly, including privacy, cybersecurity, inheritance, and even running your own node. And they do it without ever touching your Bitcoin. They're not a custodian, they're your support team. If you're serious about this like I am, go to thebitcoinway.com/Bram, that's BRAM, to book a free call. They'll walk you through your setup, personalize everything to you, and help you get a much stronger position very quickly, whether you're a beginner or more advanced. That's thebitcoinway.com/Bram.
So if we zoom out, like what are you actually measuring then, right? Like I think a lot of people would think like sentiment is kind of like a feeling, right? Bitcoin sucks or Bitcoin is good, or it's, it's moon versus crash or whatever. You extract this from the language. Like how does that even work? You just mentioned you read what, for example, the OGs are tweeting. Like what do the words tell us that the price doesn't? For example, like I think there have been some moments where the language was saying the one thing and the price was doing the total opposite. And the language was probably right, or the price was right. Like how do you can you kind of like talk us through that, and maybe also like how did you get interested in this in general? I know you're an engineer and you love words. You wrote a book as well, right? So I see the small step towards it, but yeah, like how far did you even go back?
So a couple things there, but like my love of language was a huge part of this. And then I kind of have always observed how pissed off people get in bear markets. And just this like psychological aspect of Bitcoin was really interesting to me about how much people are at each other's throats. I wanted to study this. I did it with my own language data initially, and then I did it with other people's. I'll try to keep this relatively concise here because I can get really deep into the weeds with the technical bits of it. But basically what I did, like I used a very different lens than something like Fear and Greed Index does. So these traditional sentiment analysis tools would always go and they would just aggregate everything that was out there on X. They would like just look at, hey, the most recent X posts out there are looking at these things. People on Twitter are freaking out over Saylor doing this thing or whatever. And that data sucks because it has lots of bot accounts, lots of AI accounts, lots of people that are just engagement farming and doing all these sorts of things. I basically inverted that paradigm where instead I just look at an individual. So again, I used it myself first to test out the principles. I wanted to see like how my moods changed over time based off my language. And what you do in short is like take every single tweet for an individual person. And then you run every single tweet through these machine learning tools to see if they're more optimistic than their baseline or less optimistic than their baseline. Then I do that for like 28 different emotions and look at them all over time. And on top of that, I cohort them into a bunch of different Bitcoiners and have done this for like tons and tons of Bitcoiners across the space and kind of see how things deviate. So a lot there, pretty technical, but that's sort of how I'm doing it in a rough way. And through doing this, you kind of get these like emotional lines and you can see when the crowd is disproportionately feeling one mood versus another. I do have a good chart that I can probably show here that might illustrate this a little bit. So you have something to like conceptually look at this, where I've kind of compared
Yeah.
different groups specifically for excitement.
Yeah, for sure. I think you can share your screen.
All right, so there's like a lot going on these screens, but this has maybe been one of the most interesting findings I've seen since this. What this is visualizing is showing the average excitement levels in language. Again, this is like looking through every individual's tweet, seeing how many excited words they're using and looking at it over time. And the reason this has been like one of the most high signal things I've found is because of kind of like what's happening on an interpersonal level when you've been in Bitcoin for a longer duration of time. So something that I've personally experienced is when I first came to Bitcoin, I was disproportionately affected by every new narrative out there. This price would go up, I was crazy excited. This price would fall, I'd be like really bummed out, that kind of thing. Well, the longer you've been in Bitcoin, the less volatile your emotions are. So in the same way that a price is volatile, your emotions typically get less volatile over time. Potential different reasons for that, just off time duration, getting used to the things, understanding how the market works a little bit more, being a little bit like not quite as excitable about stuff. And Bitcoin's volatility reducing over time is probably part of it as well. But because of that dynamic, it's super fascinating when the OGs get really excited and the newer Bitcoiners are not. And that's exactly what this chart actually visualizes, is these periods of time historically when the OGs were much more excited than the plebs were. And this is tracked a few different times here that I've highlighted on the chart, where it shows these periods where the price started to reach up to inflection zones, and where the average pleb was kind of like mentally thinking the price might go down or not quite as excited about it in their language. The OGs were like, they've been here before. They were kind of like more pumped about what might happen. And this is like very frequently, this gap has widened before large run-ups. And this is just a recent discovery I've had. I really haven't even shared this out super publicly yet. I'm planning to do a longer written piece where I put this in there, because I'm kind of watching these things more frequently now. But yeah, historically, especially that like summer chop solidation range where it starts inflecting was really interesting to me. And there's a lot of these emotional things here. So like, this is not people going out there and OGs saying like, I think we're going to run up tomorrow, but there's these subtle little changes in language that happen where you're kind of more excited about something. And another thing that you might find interesting about this is like, I've got really granular with understanding emotions as part of this. This was not something I anticipated when I first started doing this work, but I really wanted to like understand what different emotions meant, which sounds kind of crazy. It's like, yeah, like, angry is angry, excited is excited, but there's actually like different things that each emotion does. And like some of them are embedded in like human action, but some of them have relationships with time in strange ways. So an analogy here is that like, if you think about when you've been excited in the past, if you have like a vacation coming up in 6 months, you're pretty stoked about it. But if it's like tomorrow, you're really freaking excited about that thing coming up soon. In that way, it's a much more short-term emotion. It's looking for things right away. It contrasts that with something like optimism. That's also a positive emotion, but it's not necessarily about tomorrow. It's kind of about like in the future. I think the future is going to be positive. And people often use these things and say like the moods are good, people are greedy, these things, but there's like so much more nuance and granularity to moods.
Hmm.
Like right here is just such a good demonstration of that, because it shows that like right before people expected price run-ups to happen, their language did shift to excited. And looking at the differences of those between people that are more experienced in the markets was just really highly correlated with price moves from a high level. It's like, I don't think you're going to like have a fantastic like prediction of what's going to happen in the price tomorrow. There could be wild stuff that goes on in the news, but this was just crazy fascinating and a recent finding of me as I went through this work.
Yeah. This is the other one, I think.
Yeah. So I mentioned human action. This desire was another emotion that I really got into the nuances of. And like, I didn't come to this one with like an idea of what I even wanted to say about it. I just like did a bunch of analysis on the different moods and wanted to see which ones were the most highly correlated with Bitcoin price movements. That was my entire starting point. I had like no real biases here. I just like wanted to explore this and see what happened. And this emotion kept flagging of like has high correlation with really going high before price drawdowns. I've highlighted those three areas on there, and you can see the inverse has pretty high correlations with really good time to buy, which I'll get into. Maybe is pretty indicative of things being good right now.
It's
But this,
funny. Sorry, it's so funny. I'm looking at this. It's like the sentiment has never been like the desire has never been this low. At least not in the last 5 years.
yeah,
Right? Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is,
But sorry again. Like, is this the discrepancy between? Because what I just told you, right? Like my desire is the same, right? Like if I just think about the thesis, like I said, it's stronger than ever. So I don't necessarily have more desire. I just think like, yeah, this is the only thing that I want to own, and it's become more apparent, at least for me. But then to see that, this is really dipping the desire part, right? The green one on the bottom right. I just find it very very interesting, because I wonder then, are these people at the same level of possible understanding as me, right? Like, or not? Like, should I doubt myself or not? I find that very very interesting. But especially like right now, and we'll get into that. There's a lot of fiat people, right? A lot of crypto people, a lot of you know. I don't know. There was this guy last week on TV, the old guy who is apparently a legend, that said the Bitcoin is a warm bucket of spit or whatever. Like, for me, it's funny. We're going to talk about what the words mean, right? If you have to use those words as a professional like that, it's just such a tell. I find it very interesting.
Yeah, I cannot agree more with that. This one again, I like did not know what to think of it right away. exploration has really taken me on a bunch of different paths I wasn't anticipating right away. And when I saw this, I was like, well, I have to just, I'm like, dropped everything I was doing in my life. And I'm like, I'm going to figure out what this means, think about it in a bunch of different ways and evaluate it. And just as a starting point, like what desire is tracking is like wanting in language. It's like professing that you desire or want something, where this contrasts with something like emotion of pride, which is a little bit more action related, where you're like really pumped that you did a thing in the real world. You're like excited about it. You're bragging about it, potentially those kind of things. This is rooted in human action, some of these emotions, where pride is a very human action related emotion because you're actually having done something. Desire is the exact opposite. It's maybe the emotion that has almost some of the least rooting in human action. In some ways, you've already done the thing. You've stacked the Bitcoin. You've bought whatever it is you were going to. You have no more action to take. So all that's left to do is desire for something to go up. I think that's part of the reason that this flags towards the end of bull markets potentially, is like people are just kind of, they're no longer taking as much action. They're just professing a desire for things to happen. And that human action thing, like kind of in the realm of like praxeology and like the whole von Mises sort of thing, was just so interesting too. But I think that's part of what's going on. And just like I'm sure experientially for you, like you've kind of noticed that like during bull markets, people are just like, they're focused on this thing they can't control in the Bitcoin price. They just want for it to rise. But in bear markets, people typically go back to building and like actually stacking harder or like working on themselves and all of these things. I think that's one of the things I like accidentally kind of discovered in tracking this emotion, was that like you're actually tracking this thing where people are just like expressing their want but not taking action, versus when it's people are actually doing stuff. They're not really just expressing their desire for things to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. I think for me, when I went all in on Bitcoin, it was when it sucks that I don't know who said it, but it's he said something like, if you even remotely think Bitcoin is going to be the thing you think it's going to be, right? Like you need a seat in the stadium. And I love that idea. Like, if it's really going to turn out like we think it is, right? And Bitcoin is the only correct measurement of value, right? And everything that has value, which is everything in the world, right? Everything divided by 21 million. If that eventually will actually happen, I need to have a seat in the stadium, right? Like it's extremely entertaining to watch that play out, right? And I think, by the way, in these bearish times, it's also interesting, right? Because it's dead again for the 9,999 time, right? And most people that never talk about it come out of the fucking caves and the woodworks and say like, I told you so, like 6 years ago at $1,300 or whatever, right? I told you it was gonna die, right? That is also entertaining, but I think on the way up, you just kind of like feel that vindication, right? And you're like, oh yeah, this I remember this feeling, something like that. And then it's just fun because then you're sitting in the stadium at a game, you feel like you're winning, or at least temporarily, right? And then it's just there's a little cockiness and hubris there, and just I think just overall excitement. It's just fun. It's fun to see this play out. And if I assume you also use a lot of X data. Like it's just fun to dunk on people, right? There's a guy on X that always says, like, I screenshotted this for later, guys. Like when someone has just an extremely dumb take on Bitcoin, like I'll get back to this. Like there's a lot of people that have folders and folders of screenshots of just absolute retarded takes on Bitcoin just because the price went down, right? And so yeah, I think at least that's how I look at it, right? Like it's you wake up again because the price woke up and the demand woke up, and other also new people woke up and see the same thing, and there's this kind of like confirmation thing going on. And that's kind of my idea on this.
You can literally see this exact concept in the data too, where X or Bitcoin Twitter basically goes to sleep during periods like right now. Not only are people posting less, their language is worse, the anger and fighting. There's so much infighting. It's crazy right now, which I'm hoping we get into probably. Or like these things so predictably happen. And they happen in like,
Yes.
well, they happen in like cyclical ways too. I just was looking, I don't have charts on this one right here, but I've been kind of diving into like how emotions correlate to one another too, like, which is again something I hadn't
Mm.
thought much about before doing this. But when price started to fall, people got really angry. It was like one of the longer durations of anger periods that I saw in newer Bitcoiners. And then Saylor sold 32 Bitcoin. And like if you think about anger as an emotion, like if you ever have had something like negative happen to you and you get pissed off, it kind of pollutes your thinking, and it like makes you disproportionately look for people to blame or something to get mad at when you're angry. You're like kind of looking for villains, right? So when Saylor went and sold 32 Bitcoin and people were already pissed off before that happened because of the price, they found their villain. And now, after that's happened, the language of disapproval has never reached higher highs than it is right now in like the
Yeah.
entire history I've ever tracked in Bitcoin. And that's exactly what you'd expect to happen. If people found their villain, they're like expressing how much they're hating him.
Mm.
Kind of funny to watch these like evolution of emotions, and then people like the engagement fall during these times, which is again like it kind of makes me optimistic because like just having this visual lens to seeing where the crowd's moods are, in my opinion, makes you a little bit less immune to whatever narrative is overtaking people at the current time.
Yeah, yeah, very very interesting. I'll get to the last image here.
Yeah, so this is kind of in line with some of the fighting. So you and I connected about this, which would, it's so Michael Saylor did this piece maybe a little over a month ago now or something like that. But like I read this, and within seconds of having read it, I was like, I have to do something with this. He basically cohorted Bitcoiners into different groups. He defined four of them, which were the maximalists, fundamentalists, technologists, and capitalists.
Mhm.
And for each of these groups, he gave a definition on the group and who was in that group. Maximalist was very all encompassing, but the other three groups actually had quite a bit of like deviations and differences in how he defined them, what they believe. So I used his paradigm and basically took every person I had in the system and like got new people that fit in well and looked at the moods of these different groups over time in the same manner I'd already had my system set up to do. And what was interesting is like how different some of the groups are feeling right now. There's all sorts of, I looked at all the different emotions for these three groups and saw which sides were doing different things. And this one, I believe you're looking at the fundamentalists versus the technologists and the level of anger over time. So fundamentalist, to give a brief definition, would be somebody like very militant about running a node, on-chain Bitcoin, all these things. And just to clarify here, like I also am kind of like a little bit of all these things. I'm not like saying one of these groups is right, the other's wrong. There's just certain people that exemplify this more. Like
Which
some
was
people
the
that,
point of the article, by the way.
yeah,
I was
exactly. Even though
Mhm.
he got hate for this article on grouping
Mhm.
Bitcoiners, like
Yeah.
like I myself feel like I make up
I thought
almost
it
every.
was really good, actually. I
I
thought it was
love this.
pretty spot on, to be honest. Yeah.
Um, but what was so interesting is that after grouping these people and looking at them, like the people that were very fundamentalist have been extremely angry right now. And then you
Mhm.
compare them to the other groups who are less angry, and specifically the technologists here, which are maybe the group that I personally admire the most. They're people that are like actively building. They're a lot more older Bitcoiners. Generally, it's the group that has the most OGs in it, and the most just people building on Bitcoin, making stuff. And I just thought there was such a interesting, like, positive lesson here for Bitcoiners of like these people are pretty chill right now because they're just building during the bear market. Whereas a lot of the people that are just like really militant about the ethos of Bitcoin and not doing as much about it or a little bit more angry. Again, I'm like very much in agreement with all the principles of Bitcoin. I think like self custody is one of the most profound innovations that's ever happened in human history. Like this is just a like
Mhm. Yeah,
like a
for sure.
shit. But like the militant side of things and the fighting between them has been really fascinating to me personally.
Every Bitcoiner hits this moment. You need cash, maybe for a house deposit, an emergency, or a tax bill, and you're staring at your stack thinking, do I really want to sell this? Here's the thing, you don't have to. You can borrow against your Bitcoin instead, so there's also no taxable event and your stack can keep on stacking. This is where Firefish comes in, a peer-to-peer marketplace for Bitcoin-backed loans. And Firefish is not a lender. They built a protocol that makes this all possible, which is exactly why they never, ever have to touch your Bitcoin. During your loan, your Bitcoin sits in an on-chain multisig secured by open source code. You can find offers for different amounts, durations, and rates at firefish.io. And when you decide to get a loan, you can use code BRAM to get 30% off your first loan's fees. That's firefish.io and code BRAM. For my European friends that want to buy Bitcoin with ease, check out Relay. I've been a long-time fan and happy to partner up with what I think is the best Bitcoin-only platform for Europeans. They offer a super simple, beginner-friendly app with no distractions and no shitcoins. You can do a quick one-time smash buy or set up automatic purchases when you're stacking regularly. And here's the thing that matters most. Relay is 100% self-custody. Every set you hold is yours. Your keys, your coins. If you want to get started, download the app via my link below or in the description and use code BRAM, that's BRAM, at checkout to get 10% off your fees. A huge shout out to Relay for sponsoring the show. Now let's continue.
I agree. I find the infighting is just, it is hilarious. But I think that is also what makes Bitcoin anti-fragile, right? Like, I think it's extremely good that there are so many different people that have all these different points of views and backgrounds and philosophical ideas, technical ideas, whatever. And basically the fighting never stops, right? I just think it's amplified. And I don't know. I don't think this is, I don't know if this is a hot take, but I think it's that we're disappointed with the fact that not a lot of other people wake up to the same realization that we've had, right? Or understanding that we've had. That's also why, that's what I told you before we started, and also in my previous podcast with Cole, right? I said, in essence, Bitcoin is so extremely simple and straightforward. It's absolutely absurd introducing that into this chaotic fiat money world, right? Like it is just too good to be true. And the whole fiat money brain rot, player versus player, zero sum game, like all that stuff. Thinking something is too good to be true, there has to be, something under the hiding behind, whatever is proposed to someone. And I think that when you do the study, you get to the point where it's just so mind-blowingly innovative to, capture value in a block of text that cannot be changed, right? It's just so crazy that is actually it. And that you can transfer ownership of pieces of the blocks to another person with finality anywhere in the world, etc., right? That it can basically never die in its concept and also in its manifestation. It is absolutely mind blowing, and something that is paradigm shifting, right? What Jeff Booth says, and I think that is just the case, and we are all kind of like moving between and in the paradigms, right? And I also do think that, if you're in the Bitcoin paradigm and you look back, you like, at least for me, I do want other people to see this too. I mean, we're trying here, right?
Mhm.
But it is extremely disappointing seeing the poly market degeneracy, all this nonsense that people are doing, while the step to Bitcoin is actually fairly simple in that sense. You sell your fiat and you buy Bitcoin. So I think there's a lot of just disappointment in there, and like you said, then it's nice that you can just point to a person and say, he sucks. But what you should actually do is just look at yourself, probably, right? Um, Last thing about the language before we move into the Saylor stuff. Um, you mentioned, you're really into figuring out, what's hidden inside the language. Um, for example, when we see people who talk about Bitcoin in an investing way or in a trading way, we probably already have a certain idea of how that person views Bitcoin, because you and I probably see it as Bitcoin is a savings vehicle, right? And I think this is part of the paradigm shift. But you see, just using the one word, investing or trading, right? There's this whole worldview that's kind of like put into that one word, or whether it's conscious or not doesn't really matter. And like on the other side, we're developing this language around Bitcoin, for example, with superior savings technology or whatnot. And then you have fiat money, and this is what I talked with Cole about in the last podcast, right? Fiat has its own vocabulary, like stimulus and quantitative easing and transitory. And Cole talked about how, in the 1920s, there were maybe like 7 or 8 acronyms in the finance world, and now there's like 300 plus, like BTFP, whatever, like all that QE, all that stuff. And so we talked about how, in the fiat world, these words are invented to kind of like make the whole extractive machine feel benign, right? Like, no, it's working, it's good, we're thinking about it, we're using new words to describe, little issues here and there. And so I kind of wanted to ask you, like, do you see that Bitcoin is kind of like developing its own counter language? And is that good? Or do you think, that kind of is a barrier for people, like that doesn't help in the paradigm shift? I really wonder what you think of that.
I've looked at a bunch of the ways that like language has changed. One of the things I've always like found interesting is how much like Bitcoiners lead on like memetics generally. Like the amount of memes that have started in the Bitcoin space that have proliferated more broadly is really interesting. Like the use of the word fiat in general was like a Bitcoin space thing initially and is basically like a broader concept now. There's been a lot of stuff like this that things have started here and spread outward. And there's something interesting there with how much like Bitcoiners in general are thought leaders and kind of on the precipice of new technology, new narratives and whatnot. I've also looked at all sorts of different, like I showed all the sentiment related things so far, but I've also looked at the rate of mentions of things over time. Some of the more interesting ones just being like talking about AI generally, like how much Bitcoiners are thinking about AI frequently because they're technologists. But the one that maybe is like a little bit pertinent here is like one of the more interesting ones was digital credit, because that's kind of a phrase that's getting thrown around more by like Saylor and other people in the like Bitcoin capitalist space. And like I've always noticed this in the past when a big guest goes on a big podcast and talks about a different word, uses a different phrase, and then you'll just see the entire ecosystem like hop onto it and start using it. A really good example of this recently was the word inoculate that Saylor used when selling Bitcoin. They wanted to inoculate the market. And then that word is a strange word that very few people would ever use. But now that's used commonly. And I've actually like tracked this in narrative data where you see like it talked about way more. But the same trend happened with digital credit, where this was like a non-existent term. And it started with Saylor. He was like the very inception point of this phrase, and now it's kind of spread out there more broadly. And that happens all the time. Like you can actually watch narratives change and visualize how they're adapting through the space. I find this really interesting. And it kind of relates to the mood too, where like certain narratives will spread more rapidly under certain mood regimes. So one of the moods I looked at in this manner, like doing the narrative analysis for, was the strategic Bitcoin reserve, where this has been a narrative since 2024. In 2024, though, moods were very optimistic, excited, just the whole constellation of positive moods. So people really latched on that narrative as though we were going to have like this persistent government buyer, just buy Bitcoin all the time, print fiat, do the whole thing. Well, that didn't happen. And there's still actually news around the strategic Bitcoin reserve. But because people are so pissed off and the price is down, like even though things are moving forward in some way, you see like Besant going out and talking about it even more frequently. The rate at which like people are excited about it is really low. I think that's kind of an interesting thing, like how moods are related to narratives, because these are these stories that we tell ourselves. And there's just a relationship there that's fascinating to me too.
Yeah, for sure. So let's move on to the Sailor stuff we mentioned, because this is also where we kind of circled around the same thing. As I said, and people can look this up. It's on Sailor's X under his articles, and yeah, like you said, fundamentalists, capitalists, maximalists, and technologists, and Sailor kind of like laid out these four camps, and I think the main kind of like fight. There's core and knots, right? But I think the main fight, people pointing at Saylor, is capitalists versus the fundamentalists. The fundamentalists are arguably more angry, as you just showed in your chart, right? Um, I wrote a piece, and I kind of like argued that the capitalists, in my opinion, are dragging Bitcoin across the adoption chasm, right? Whether we like it or not. Am I particularly a fan? No, I not really, because I do think that you know a fiat minded mind and a fiat minded way of operating in finance uses um, plays, ways, strategies, tactics, whatever, that work in fiat, right? But with Bitcoin, you just mentioned self-custody, right? Like that is the main thing. But the fact that you are able to custody it yourself, right? And I can basically force you to be transparent if you and I want to do business, right? If you say you're good for XYZ Bitcoin or whatever, I can force you to show it to me, because it is possible. And if you then say no, right, that kind of um, changes the way I perceive your trustworthiness, right? And in fiat, everything is abstracted, obfuscated, etc. So you can make a lot of these, literally abstractions on, the actual valuable thing where it starts. Sometimes there isn't even a real valuable thing, right? Or the perception of a valuable thing, let's say a mortgage, right? And layers and layers and layers can be created up and to the side, right? To just make a market, make money, whatever, fuck around. I think that will definitely happen with Bitcoin for sure, because that is just the modus operandi of capitalists in that sense. But I think with Bitcoin you cannot take it that far, because you either have the Bitcoin or you don't, right?
Mhm.
And so if the underlying capital or um, collateral is Bitcoin, then yeah, again, you either have it or you don't, right? Can there be 10 layers of abstraction on top of that? I don't think so.
Mm.
Are people going to try? For sure. Are people going to blow up against Bitcoin? For sure, right? I would argue that's actually a good thing, because that will show that it's not about Bitcoin. Bitcoin is trustworthy in that sense. Bitcoin actually makes them blow up, right? Like it exposes the schemes they're trying to continue coming from the fiat world. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Right.
for sure.
But on the other side, so why are they dragging it across the chasm? Is, well, if Bitcoin is pristine collateral, if it's the hardest money to ever exist, if it's the thing that we should use to value everything in the world, you can use it with this um, absolute scarcity, permissionlessness, um, instant final settlement globally 24/7 365. That is way better than anything that actually exists, right? So it's logical that the people that would use that would actually adopt the thing, right? I would, if that wouldn't happen, it's not the thing we think it is, right? And so it needs to happen. Everything was fringe in the beginning. Every technology was fringe in the beginning, but there are groups of people in an adoption curve that actually pull it towards the early majority, right? Because the early majority is not the same as the innovators and the early adopters. Definitely not. That's why the chasm is there, right? So whether we like it or not, the capitalists, I think, have to pull Bitcoin toward the early majority. But I think there are interesting characteristics of Bitcoin that actually help it protect against the fuckery that is inevitably going to happen. And that's kind of how I look at it. Whereas, maybe the fundamentalists, the people that are actually angry and pointing at Saylor, right? It's all like, don't buy MSTR or buy Bitcoin. Yeah, you and I know that.
Mm.
I'm not sure if the rest of the world is going to know that too in the short term. And short term is 40 years or
Mm.
whatever, right? So
To
yeah,
me,
that's kind of how I view it.
one of the most beautiful things about Bitcoin that is just like always like just enraptured my attention rather than be so excited about it is that it's this system that aligns incentives across groups that disagree with each other. Money for enemies, right? People say that, but it's like, do you actually
For
freaking
sure.
believe that if you're mad at
Yeah,
people using it in a different way than you? Like,
exactly.
it's
That's a
so
good point.
beautiful that I
Yeah,
can go use this thing privately in El Salvador, and those people are actually enriched by Saylor trying to embed Bitcoin into the capital markets. Like the incentive alignment of this system is like at its core of what makes this so profound and positive for the world, in my opinion. So now that that's finally happening, yeah, just don't use Bitcoin in that way. Don't buy MSTR, don't buy STRC, but there's people out there who are going to more readily be able to access those tools, have more interest in those tools, and who are not interested in self custody. So is this not just like slightly practically better for those people while still benefiting those who want to use self custody or transact with Bitcoin in a much more sovereign way? to me, it just makes so much sense, even if it's not ideally what you would want to do. Like, you got to be empathetic to what other people might want and how they use money, right? Like, they're not going to be this like super nerdy autistic dude who just like works and has everything on his own node. Like, people are going to use this different ways, and it probably doesn't make sense for a grandma to self custody Bitcoin on a ledger or a cold card or something, you know? So I'm pretty practical and pragmatic about it. And despite all the fighting about it, I do think it's like a really positive thing. And this is exactly what you would have expected as Bitcoin became more mainstream adopted. And I'm just
Yeah.
like not, I really reject the narrative that Bitcoin can't still be used as freedom money, because it's happening all the time. And it's
Yeah.
easier to use Lightning than it ever has been.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I just pulled up this article, right? Like, so with every group, he says, these, he defines them. These are their strengths. This is what they're for, but also the natural risk. And it says the risk is that fundamentalism can become too closed. If Bitcoin is only acceptable when used in one narrow way, then billions of people, companies, and institutions may be excluded from its benefits. A world of 8 billion people will not all use Bitcoin in the same way. Some will self custody, some will use banks, some will buy securities. Some will hold Bitcoin through companies, some will borrow against it, some will build credit currencies and capital markets on top of it. If fundamentalists reject all institutional integration and all technical improvement, they may protect Bitcoin's purity while limiting its reach. And I mean, I fully agree. Again, I am not per se a Bitcoin capitalist, but the last thing that he says is like, and I think the fundamentalists that uh, I'm definitely a part of, right? You can keep everyone else in check by keeping on talking about and trying to educate people on the profoundness of Bitcoin, self custody, what that actually means, right? And I don't think it's only practical; it's also very, very spiritual, right? Like, what does that actually bring you? What does that sovereignty actually um, uh, bring you? But you cannot, like you said, you cannot be like, there are other people that have figured out the same way, the same thing that I have figured out, but they're doing something with it that I don't like. Then, I almost want to say, then I'm not really sure if you understand what the thing is, because it's kind of, um, I almost want to say ignorant. I don't know. I'm going to get flaked, but it's ignorant to think everyone is going to look at it as you look at it, right? And I think, again, if someone uses Bitcoin in a way I don't like, then I just think it's dumb how they do that. But I cannot really change it. The point is, anyone can use it. Does that make sense? Like, I just
It's never been more the case that Bitcoiners are using it in different ways too. Like, this really does seem like the way that things are evolving is like there's
but
these
it's
different.
always the case. Some people are in $1 million in debt. I have zero. Like, I don't know. Like, people use any stuff in different ways, right? Like, I don't know.
It's just crazy to me that you like have to use Bitcoin in this one singular way. So I was at Bitcoin 2026 a few months back, and I had this experience there that I like think about all the time, because I went and watched Eric Kaysen give a speech, who is one of my favorite Bitcoiners. He
Legend.
has like, his
Yeah.
raids towards the fiat system. I love it so much. It was like really fun to watch it in person.
I think he
And
starts every talk with "fuck the state." I love
yeah,
that.
he did. It was
Yeah,
wonderful.
yeah, yeah.
Um,
Shout out to
so
Eric.
I was pumped. It was a good time. And then I looked around the crowd, and across the entire crowd, there was people in strategy t-shirts and Metaplanet t-shirts, all peppered throughout. And these were not folks that were just there, like they were into it. They were as into it as I was. They were like pumped that they were watching this. And the topic was about the difference, or like, has the state co-opted Bitcoin, or has the Bitcoin co-opted the state? And it was just so interesting, because like you see all these people that are in the more traditional finance realm, right? Who a lot of people would be like, no, these are not true Bitcoiners. But these guys like clearly believed in this ethos so much that they were excited to go watch Eric Kaysen give this speech about it, and were into it. While at the same time, like wearing strategy and Metaplanet t-shirts. And like, I think some people don't realize, like, there's a lot of people that are deep believers in Bitcoin that have jobs in the more traditional finance realms or in that kind of world, that simply cannot like move their clients' money into self-custody and just write 12 words on a piece of paper or something. They need some more complex ways to interact with these things. And they're trying to actually fight for Bitcoin using the capital markets. And I felt like I saw like a visual representation of that at this
Fun.
conference It was really cool.
Yeah.
I still think about it frequently because there's like you think there's these different groups, but that's just a great example of how like we're very complex. Like humans are not just like one simple thing. Like as much as I'm cohorting people analyzing language, like no single Bitcoiner I've looked at is in one cohort. Everybody has multiple different things they're into and personalities. And I think it's just like too simplistic to think like this group is objectively wrong, this group's objectively right.
Yeah. I wonder where you place me. Do you have my do you have my data? It's so funny. I I'm gonna think about that. I definitely fall into the hubris trap when the price goes up, and it's all I'm an I told you so type person in that period. I think, yeah, and it's also actually, you just reminded me of what an amazing opportunity we have to educate the people that come in through Stretch or whatever, to educate them on what Bitcoin actually is, right? Like I think, um to go back to what the fiat world shaped, people don't even understand that they can be sovereign with their money. They don't even understand that they're not sovereign with their money right now, right? Like that is where most, like 99% of people are at, I would say. So how can you expect that everyone is just going to wake up at the same time, right? Or via the same route, or hook, or whatever key point that they find, right? So I just, unfortunately, I have to say, I just don't think that's how it works.
Mhm.
It's just that I would love that it works like that, right? That everyone who listens to one podcast of me, you know, just wakes up and gets Bitcoin, but it's just not. It's just not how it works. So I do think the opportunity to tell more people what the actual underlying thing is just slowly growing. And how can that be, um, a bad thing, right? And something else you said, that, I liked. You said something like Bitcoin makes the liars blow up. Um, and fiat money is used to prevent blowups, right? So there's going to be a point in the future, I'm sure of, where a lot of fiat stuff is going to blow up, and Bitcoin is just going to chill, and more people are going to wake up and be like, oh, it's still not dead, and it's not crashing like the rest of the fucking world, right? Like, so you also, there's also a little bit of faith in a sense. Nothing is 100% certain, right? Like you're just creating your own thesis and trying to act upon it in your way, and I'm doing it in my way, and everyone is doing that in their own way. But there is no 100% certainty. There is also a little faith in whatever part of Bitcoin you maybe don't understand or are a bit afraid of or whatever, right? Like yeah, you just cannot have all the certainty.
Speaking of certainty, it kind of actually reminds me of like a couple differences between these groups. Like this is yet another thing I've like measured, and we were just on the topic of the fundamentalists versus the capitalists. Like one of the things I found really interesting was looking at like certainty levels, conviction levels over time in these groups. And not only are the fundamentalists much more angry, their levels of conviction have been much lower and declining over the last like year or two. Whereas the capitalists they're still like a little bit annoyed with the negative price action, especially good treasuries are down like 80% on average, like MSTR is just way down. But they have very high conviction levels, very high certainty levels currently, which I found really interesting as it was one of the biggest deviations when I looked at these groups at all. I just find that stuff really fascinating where you get like, uh, there's a different ways to read this, right? It's not just like this mood means good, this mood means bad. I think all these emotions are kind of related to the stories that we tell ourselves. And when you have higher levels of conviction, it kind of means like you have higher levels of conviction that your framework for viewing the world is correct. If you have lower levels of conviction, it's usually indicative of like my framework for viewing the world is getting more weakened or maybe less accurate. And I kind of think that sort of there's part of the reason is like this is kind of like an existential thing of like some people in the Bitcoin space thought Bitcoin was going to become adopted in their one specific way. Everybody would have to use it in the same way. The capitalists tried to embed Bitcoin into the financial system, and they're clearly getting a lot of adoption. They're clearly still gaining conviction in this. So like, I really am skeptical that this is all going to come crumbling down. I really don't think that's going to happen. And I think a lot of people are very much going to keep using like financialized tools or using the Wall Street style of Bitcoin. Like I think this is going to continue whether or not you like it or not. It's going to keep happening. And I think it is like, even if it's not the way you personally want to see the world, like is like the way that it's happening right now. And even if that makes you disappointed or frustrated, it still is making those self-sovereign Bitcoin holders more economically powerful, you know?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. And I also think, you know, there's an emergent technology, and a lot of different people look at it in a different way, and they want to build something on, in, or next to it. And a lot of those will fail, because most business ideas suck in general. I always say, right? And that is just all part of it. I mean, is there such upheaval about Bitcoin ATM companies dying, right? Like what, it's just an attempt from people that see a certain future or believe in a certain future. They have a certain underlying thesis, and they're trying to act upon it. I mean, there's one video. I think it's a presentation by Matt Cole of Strive. You know, if you listen to that, it's extremely bullish. Like you don't have to like love what Strive is doing, but it's extremely bullish. And if you don't see that, I think you're also doing yourself a disservice, to be honest, because I think the different types of groups, that we're talking about here that are identified, they all try to do something in their own way. Should we like it all the time? No, I think ordinals are dumb too. Yeah, but if someone wants to build ordinal stuff, you can try, but it's just dumb. I think it's dumb, right? So, and if you believe in a free market, et cetera, then
Uh,
if more people than not don't think it's dumb, then it's going to be a thing. Like yeah,
I kind of like didn't respond to you in full on the last one, but like financial markets and things, like when price goes down, there's pain. But that pain is information. I love that quote. It's like, just because things are down doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. Like you have this opportunity to grow from negative things that happen to you, right? If you have a positive mindset and you're willing to shift who you are and how you view and interact with the world. So like, I think this is happening in some way with Bitcoin treasury companies and STRC. Like a lot of people have theses around them, but I've seen a lot of people enter through these things that have then like learned about Bitcoin through them. And part of that is because of the pain. They realized they basically bought this leveraged Bitcoin thing and they didn't really fully understand it, and it fell. And I've seen people like just stacking real Bitcoin after coming in through these more financialized products. I think that's just like free markets working, people realizing what Bitcoin actually is, and it's kind of, it's maybe not through this, like they're immediately adopting cold storage Bitcoin right away, but they're entering into this ecosystem, and there's going to be all sorts of fiat games played, to your earlier point. It's going to happen. It's like just a fundamental truth about like how this is going to go. Like there's going to be fiat games that are played, but Bitcoin is this unilateral exit from this system where it gives people a way to get out. And like comparatively to things like gold, which even if you held a gold ETF or something like that, there wasn't this like unilateral exit ability. Or even if you do hold something on an exchange or in certain types of ETFs, you do have this like much lower friction way to get on-chain Bitcoin. And just that check on the system alone is so much more superior to gold as a technology. And like, it's like it's less of a hyper specific way to think about how Bitcoin has to be adopted, and more of like a practical approach for like how other people might work with a network. And it's like more like an empathetic view to like how other people might even want to approach Bitcoin outside of your own framing of the world.
yeah. I couldn't agree more with that. And it's interesting, right? Like you see a community that's kind of fracturing, right? There's like more groups. There's people that are in one group or in multiple groups. Um, some people would say, fracturing is a decline. I think you frame it more as a richness. And when we talked before we planned this recording, we were talking about how Bitcoin is extremely multidisciplinary, right? And that was kind of like the word that I just fumbled that we kept getting back on, right?
Mhm.
It's economics, energy, philosophy, game theory, linguistics, sentiment. So do you think the multidisciplinary nature protects Bitcoin because kind of like no single group can capture it? Or do you think um, it'll actually make it harder for more people to understand it?
I think it's a really positive thing about it. If you just think like it's a larger surface area of people to learn about it. Like if you're really deep into the more Wall Street world and you're not going to like learn as much or have those touch points with somebody who's telling you you have to like run your own node and only use on-chain Bitcoin, but you might have a touch point with somebody who owns a treasury company. And a framing that I really like these days is like when I first got into Bitcoin, I started telling people about it. I'd really get heartbroken when I would like profess how much of a life-changing technology I thought this was, and they would just totally reject me. It happens a lot. I'm sure a lot of people can empathize with having that happen to you. Yeah, like the framework that I use to think about that now that I think is more constructive is like touch points. So I personally had a lot of touch points with Bitcoin before I got into it. And not all of them I was constructive about. I probably told somebody in the past that it was stupid in like 2015 or something like that. Um, but I think a useful way to think about this is like, okay, I maybe won't tell somebody about Bitcoin and they immediately buy it, but maybe they took 4 touch points or 5 touch points to understand Bitcoin, and I was touch point number 3. So even though it didn't work here, like at least I'm helping move them towards Bitcoin. And with that in mind, I think the same thing is happening with the broader spectrum of Bitcoiners. Like, because if we have a wider variety of things we're doing out in the world, a wider variety of like domains that we touch, it increases the likelihood people get touch points to Bitcoin because people are doing different things with it. People approach it in different ways. Because like we've mentioned the Wall Street thing a lot, but man, there's like crazy different communities of Bitcoiners too, into like um, much more like totally different domains outside of just like the capital market stuff that are really into Bitcoin. I just think this is a really positive thing overall. And having that diverse array of different things means that like a person that has multiple interests, which we pretty much all do, we're not just like one singular thing, any of us, it increases the likelihood there's like they come into contact with somebody who's into the same couple things they are, and therefore might have a better way to get uh, exposed to Bitcoin in a way where they like really feel connected with it.
Mm-hmm. And it's it's so funny because this connects to what we chatted about when we were planning this, right? And um, if we go back to the, let's say, the fundamentalists being very angry, I shared with you that I was kind of thinking, okay, so you're angry because someone you don't like is doing things that you don't like, right? But I mean, if you're fading Bitcoin right now, you're fading it with everything that you know, right? All of it, everything, the characteristics, the values that emanate from Bitcoin, the profoundness, the paradigm shift, all that stuff, all the public data that is there, all the extremely smart people that are gravitating towards Bitcoin, like everything, right? The 10,000 obituaries and whatnot. And then like today you decide like, oh no, this is stupid. I'm so mad, right? I wouldn't understand why anyone would do that, right? But we're actually in the middle of the worst vibes in years. So maybe to tie it back to your data, right? Like what is the data actually saying like right now, to wrap this up about moments like this one? And what would you tell people to do with, whatever you're seeing?
So one of the ways I've been thinking about sentiment data is much less about like it's a great time to buy because it's going to go up 2 days from now or something like that. And I found it the most useful when zooming out and looking at the overall emotional regimes. And across all of them, we shared a couple of them, like the desire one, for example. Like a bunch of these things that have proven historically to be amazing times to buy Bitcoin are all flashing right now. I wrote a piece not long ago called the inverse of euphoria, because like around bull markets, there's like optimism, conviction, excitement, all just peaking in tandem. We saw those all crash at a level almost faster than has ever happened in the last like 3 years, I think, based off the timeline I had. Like these are all things that you see much closer to bottoms. And I don't know if we're at a bottom for sure. Like there could be stuff that happens out in the broader world that like you just cannot measure or control over, crazy stuff that can happen politically or something like that you cannot predict. But probabilistically, like it just seems like such a high upside time to buy Bitcoin right now, precisely because of these things. And like To make another analogy here, one way I really like to think about this is like a lot of times people will use meditation as a way to like watch their thoughts and get better at like seeing what they're thinking, like be an observer rather than just get influenced by what's happening inside them emotionally. And I really like to think about sentiment data in that kind of way too, where like the crowd is angry, the crowd is disapproving, and they're yelling at one another. But if you recognize that, you can become a little bit more immune from it. You're not as disproportionately impacted by some of these things. And we're all kind of swimming in like a sea of sentiment. Like you might think you're immune from emotions, but if you're consuming podcasts or you're on X at all, or like if you interact with anybody that's into Bitcoin, they're all kind of in these negative moods right now. So if you go in knowing that and you get better at fading narratives or being less fearful when the crowd is, you're going to be served extremely well, in my opinion. And just historically looking at some of this data, that's like proven to be really effective times to stay long Bitcoin is when the moods are this bad like this.
So studying Bitcoin is kind of like a way to meditate and tune out the noise. Well, maybe that's a good starter for our next conversation.
I love it.
Yeah, awesome, man. Well, I'll obviously link to your Substack, which is sentimentsully.substack.com, where you write these pieces. I find it very cool that you're focusing on this. I also think it is valuable. Unfortunately, it's just coming back every so often. Apparently, there is a cycle in this sentiment too. So I find that extremely interesting. And thanks a lot for sharing your thoughts and coming on, man.
Yeah, thanks so much. If people want to stay up to date with us, yeah, the Substack's the best way. I have a newsletter that I put out weekly called Bitcoin Sentiment Weekly. It's just like a free one if you want to stay up and to date with the things I'm currently watching and thinking about. But either way, I just appreciate it and stay bullish, everybody.
Awesome. Cheers.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, you can click here to find more just like it, and click here to find all Bitcoin for Millennials podcast episodes. Also, if you want to help me shine a light on the message of Bitcoin, please like this video and subscribe to stay connected. I hope to see you for our next episode. Bye.